Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's devotional. Before we get started, I want to kind of add a disclaimer here. Our topic today is going to be a little bit more explicit, and we're going to be discussing aspects of a sexual nature. So if you've got little kids that you don't want to necessarily have a conversation about that right now, if they ask questions, what's he talking about, you may want to pause the video and let the kids go somewhere else, so that you kind of have a bit more ability to control that type of a dialogue and conversation. And so years ago, I encountered, and since then I'm familiar with at least one particular situation that took place years ago, in which a preacher told a woman who she was she was married, she was in a situation where her husband was habitually looking at pornography. And this preacher told this married woman that she had cause for divorce, because Jesus says that by looking at pornography, her husband was in fact committing adultery, and therefore the wife had the right or the ability to divorce for that reason. And she did. She divorced him for that reason. However, and that's not the only time that that's been taught, and this is one of those types of teachings that kind of goes around, and then it goes away for a little while, then it comes back a little bit. But I want to look at this because I was asked a little bit about it from one of our brethren, and I wanted to look at this from the scriptures that are being discussed. We're not going to go into a great big high detail study of all the times where these terms take place and all of that, but I just want to look at Matthew 5 for the most part here, starting in verse 31. Okay, starting in verse 31, and of course there's mirror passages like Matthew 19 and 1 Corinthians 7 and Romans 7 and so forth, but we're going to stay here. It says, "Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." You'll remember that Jesus was asked, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? And Jesus says that because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed you to do that, to be able to give her a certificate of divorce, and to divorce them. "But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced," which is to say she's been put away for sexual immorality, "that individual who marries her is also guilty of adultery." So we've got two terms here: sexual immorality, which is translated fornication in the King James, but you also have adultery. Now, these are two basic terms that have the same meanings. They both mean illicit sexual intercourse. This is physical. Now, there are a couple of times in Revelation where the concept of fornication is used in a spiritual way. So in that way, you could say it was kind of metaphorical, but never has it expanded in terms of physical sin. Has it expanded beyond the physical illicit sexual act? Now, our term fornication, as I said here, is sexual immorality. And the difference between sexual immorality, all adultery is sexual immorality. Okay, adultery is just a little bit more specific in that one or both of those individuals are either currently married to someone else, or they are currently bound by law to someone else. Thus, this is what happens. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced, that woman's divorced, but she's still bound by law. She's not able to take another husband. They commit adultery because this woman is currently bound by law. Now, that being the case, I want you to consider, and I clicked something, didn't I? There we go, okay. So the term fornication, here's the Greek term translated fornication, and it's used a whole lot in the New Testament. The definition is illicit sexual intercourse, and this is from Vines and Strong's and Thayer's. They all are the same. And it's the understanding of that sexual act, that physical sexual act. Now, the term adultery is one who has unlawful intercourse with the spouse of another, or again, one who is bound, even though they may not be the spouse anymore, they're divorced, but they're still bound by law, and so that also applies as well. The origin or the root of the thought process about pornography comes back from this goes back to that term porneia. And because the term porneia is linked, therefore, to pornography, therefore, the kind of forgive me for saying this, but the kind of the lazy attribution of pornography is then attributed to fornication, and then they say, "See, you have the right to divorce." But understanding the term pornography is not the same as porneia. Porneia is the illicit sexual intercourse. Pornography is the displaying of either pictures or sound or whatever of illicit sexual intercourse. Even in the term pornography, the concept of the term porn itself goes back to the sexual intercourse aspect. The ography is the depiction of it, or the presentation of it. And so those who argue, first of all, are arguing from an incorrect, and again, I tend to look at it as a lazy perspective. They're simply trying to connect porneia to pornography, same term, same thing, therefore pornography counts as fornication. And that's not true. Because even the term pornography simply means the depiction of sexual intercourse. Even the term pornography is about the physical act. That's what's being displayed, is the physical act, not one who is viewing the pornography. That's not the physical act. Now, again, going to the root of this particular thought, or the verses that people use to defend this or to argue this, starts here in verse 27. You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not commit adultery." Now, our term adultery here is moikos or moichos. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And then Jesus goes on to describe how important it is to avoid ending up in hell, going so far as to the extreme example of it would be worth it if you ended up, plucking out your eye or your hand or whatever to keep yourself holy and righteous and not go to hell. But what Jesus says here in verses 27 and 28 are very important to note, because individuals who are arguing this case, they will automatically link porneia to verse 27 and 28, when the term porneia isn't actually used in verses 27 and 28. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, the term lust is epithumio. The term adultery is mucheo. This is, first of all, it's not porneia. And so this is part of the reason why I say the arguments of this are somewhat, again, I feel a little harsh in saying it, but they're lazy. It's a lazy argument. It's a very extremely thin connection that they're trying to argue here. And when you can't even link the actual Greek term to the term pornography in the text that you're using to say that pornography is the means for adultery, or is the means for divorce because of adultery, it doesn't work well. However, let's kind of go that route though. You've heard it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. We know Jesus is talking about the physical act. He's referring to the Old Testament, the 10 Commandments. I say to you, okay, so Jesus is going to take this a step further. Not to say that committing adultery isn't a sin, it is. But whoever looks at a woman to lust for her, David on the roof, or on his balcony when he's seeing Bathsheba, okay, the moment he sees Bathsheba, he could have turned around, gone back to bed, and just forgotten it. But instead, he lingered. And as he lingered, at that point in there, he lusted after her. And it was at that point that David actually first sinned. Then he inquires about her, he sins for her, then he commits adultery with her. But he actually initially sinned when he allowed his mind to progress in such a way in imagination, in fantasy, in the thought process of actually having that sexual relationship with Bathsheba. And this is what Jesus is referring to. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, this is the basis of the argument. Well, if he's already committed adultery, Jesus says he's committed adultery in his heart, therefore, that's means for divorce. But notice again that our term, I keep doing that. Our term for adultery, oh my word, there we go. Our term for adultery, it denotes one who has unlawful intercourse with the spouse of another, or one who is bound to another, or bound to the law, to not be able to remarry. But notice that Jesus has to define where this adultery is taking place. See, Jesus modifies the term. It's not just commits adultery, because everywhere else the concept of adultery is that illicit sexual intercourse when you don't have the right to that relationship. But here, and it's understood that that would be a physical relationship, but here Jesus says that this process or this thought, this lust, is happening in his heart. Okay, this is something that is already taking place. Now, to be fair and to be clear, and I personally make the same case, that you can just as easily substitute fornication for adultery here in verse 28. Because if you're talking about, of course, Jesus, he's speaking particularly to individuals who are married, okay, because that's why he references you shall not commit adultery. These are individuals who are married. You can just make the same point regarding the principle Jesus establishing with porneia, the term fornication. Okay, even someone who is not married and he's looking on a woman and lusting after her commits fornication in his heart. In his heart. It is not in the flesh. Now, is that still sinning? Yes, it's still sin. To be clear, is looking at pornography sinful? Yes, it is. What about quote-unquote soft porn? Okay, men or women who are dressed skimpily, maybe there's not any sexual intercourse being displayed or shown, but it still elicits that desire from the individuals looking at those pictures. Yes, that's still sinful. It's still wrong. But to say that what a person thinks therefore has a physical consequence to the extent of being guilty of adultery, literally adultery, so that a spouse can then divorce that person, creates a bit of a problem. Because adultery, lust is not the only issue in which an individual can in their heart consider something and be guilty of it. So if you're going to make that case, you also have to go all the way back to anger. In verse 21, Jesus again says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Again, he quotes Old Testament. Again, it's part of the 10 Commandments. Whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Okay, we know murder is wrong. But I say to you, Jesus is going to take this a step further. Whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. Whoever says you fool shall be in danger of hellfire. Jesus takes this a step further. In fact, John, in his descriptions of loving the brethren and versus hating their brother, John says that one who hates the brother is the same as murdering him. Well, Jesus makes this statement. Jesus says whoever's angry with his brother without cause, you link that with what John says, he's a murderer in his heart. It's not any different. Okay, you have a physical sin, in this case murder, but if you have that hatred, that anger, or that desire to murder, or that desire to malicious, there we go, that malicious intent, you're just as guilty as if you had murdered them. However, does that mean that I suffer the consequences physically of a murderer? I mean, if we're going to say that someone who, in their mind, quote unquote, commits adultery, is to suffer the physical consequences, i.e., their spouse can divorce them, then anger has to be a part of that too. And if you really wanted to get down into the depths with it, if I hate my spouse, I don't murder them, but I hate them. In essence, I have murdered them in my mind, so I'm no longer bound to that person. I'm no longer married to that person because I've killed them in my mind. So now I should be able to remarry because they're dead. I mean, you can go all kinds of different ways with this if you're going to go that route. But for that matter, let's just look at it from the angle of the idea of pornography, or for that matter, the idea of lust, okay? There are times where inappropriate commercials will come on for those who still watch TV. Sometimes YouTube will have ads that sometimes are inappropriate, where a man or a woman will be wearing something skimpy. Sometimes you've got the Victoria's Secret type commercials and things that pop up. Let's say that there's a husband and a wife who are watching TV and one of those commercials pops up. And they're both Christians. The husband is, keeping his thoughts where they need to be. He's not lusting after the women being portrayed in this Victoria's Secret commercial. And the commercial ends, the show begins again, and they continue on. And the next day, the wife files for divorce for the cause of adultery. Because, well, you saw those women in that Victoria's Secret ad, and I know you must have lusted after them. How could she know, one way or another, for sure, if her husband did or didn't lust after them? It would be no different than going to the beach. Maybe we're all fully clothed, and yet there certainly are individuals there who maybe are not clothed as they should be. And I mean, how is the wife supposed to determine, or for that matter, the husband supposed to determine if the wife is lusting after individuals around them? It goes to the root of what can God judge and what does man judge. Only God knows the heart of man. Only God is able to discern the thoughts and intents of the heart. Man is able to discern the actions and certainly the words, but not the heart. And this goes back to the issue here, that if you're just going to limit it to pornography, that's a problem. Because again, Jesus doesn't say that it's just the depiction of sexual relations. It's lusting after an individual. That can be anything. I mean, in terms of stimuli, whether it's pornography, whether it's a Victoria's Secret ad, maybe it's just at Walmart. I mean, there are people wearing less than underwear sometimes at Walmart shopping. And who's to say that a husband or a wife doesn't lust after someone at Walmart? And it goes back to, this is why Jesus defines or modifies the term here, committed adultery. He has to define where this took place, not in the flesh, which is what the term adultery denotes, but rather it took place in his mind, in his heart. Therefore, it is not, as per what we see regarding what Jesus teaches. And it's interesting that right after this, Jesus teaches about divorce. that Jesus says, except for sexual immorality or fornication, causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Jesus doesn't include whoever divorces his wife except for any reason except sexual immorality in their heart. You think he would if he were being all-encompassing here. Because certainly committing the physical act of adultery or fornication certainly involves the lust of the heart and the mind. So you would think that Jesus would be all-encompassing with that if that were a viable reason for divorce. And yet Jesus doesn't do that. He leaves it in the physical, the flesh, the physical realm, so that they understand that this is physical fornication, physical adultery. Can I sin with my thoughts? Yes, I can. But can my wife or my husband, whatever the case may be, simply judge whether or not I've kept my thoughts straight or not when seeing a random commercial pop up on TV? No, they can't. And it really ultimately, I think this is it's an attempt to, we talk about loosening where God has bound and binding where God has loosened. This is an attempt to loosen where God has bound. God has bound the teaching of marriage and divorce or remarriage. He's taught about what adultery and fornication is. And this is an effort to try to alleviate people who are maybe in a marriage that maybe they're not happy, maybe they're certainly, and to be absolutely clear, and we're not even going into all that the idea of pornography and stuff can certainly have major ramifications and can speak to certain issues within a marriage. But that isn't cause for divorce. And to teach that, it's a false teaching. And that will, if people adhere to that, if they hear that and follow it, they're going to lose their soul over that. For unlawfully divorcing a spouse, thinking or having been convinced or choosing to be convinced that they have a right to do so when they don't. All right. That's our daily devotional today. I know it's a little bit more explicit, I guess, in our topic today. But as I said, I was asked about it, and this is something I've encountered a couple of times in the past, and I know of at least one particular situation. And this is just one of those things that it's kind of an example of people trying to redefine terms to make it say something that it doesn't say. Not even in the actual text does it say that. Porneia is not used earlier in verse 28, 27 and 28. All right. Lord willing, our next daily devotion will be tomorrow at 6:30. Hope to see you all then. Thank you, everybody.